Oh, Brother Lloyd. Yeah, come on. Uh, we're live now. We just want to welcome those who's joining us by YouTube, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Good morning to you all. We got a little testimony going on here.
Well, my back was bothering me for a number of days, going to the chiropractor and stuff like that. But today, it's good. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I thank him for helping me with the mortgage and the finances of that. I give that to God. Help me get through that quick and early, fast. Only God. That's it. That's it. Right? Not to me. What can I say? Give him the glory. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. So the title of my message this morning is A Brother's Reconciliation. And we're going to be talking about Jacob and Esau. And that's in the book of Genesis, chapters 25, 27, 32, and 33. It's a forgiveness Bible story. Many of you are familiar with the Bible story of Jacob and Esau, how Jacob took Esau's inheritance. He went in and got the blessing from his father, but we'll get into that soon. First, I want to touch on unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is when you are willing or unable to forgive someone for hurting, betraying, breaking your trust, or causing you intense emotional pain. Forgiving is highly recommended, as there are various researches that have been carried out which shows that unforgiveness causes many health issues, including, which I was really surprised at this, cancer. 61% of cancer patients have forgiveness issues. I was really surprised at that. I had no idea. Suppressed anger. People often get angry for any reason and have issues associated with forgiveness. Low self-esteem. Lack of self-love stems from not forgiving yourself or having self-acceptance. Bitterness can increase risk of depression. Constant worrying increases the risk of sleep deprivation and anxiety. A rise in blood pressure and heart disease. So these are some of the things that unforgiveness can affect you health-wise. Unforgiveness can affect your mental health as well. Which is more difficult, would you say, to forgive or to be forgiven? You could argue it either way. If you say it's more difficult to forgive, you are right. When you forgive someone, you are doing at least two things. You are choosing to overlook the pain of the past, and you are choosing to give the offender another chance. So you're right, it's more difficult to forgive. Unless, of course, you say it's more difficult to be forgiven. In which case, you are also correct, because whenever you decide to be forgiven, you are doing at least three things. You are admitting your guilt, you are accepting forgiveness, and you are implicitly agreeing to a new course of action. So, which is more difficult, to forgive or to be forgiven? That all depends on your point of view, and whether you are the offender or the victim. The truth is, both are very difficult in our humanity. Most of us find it hard to forgive. Many of us find it even harder to be forgiven. And that really is the message of Genesis chapter 32 and 33 of Esau and Jacob. Forgiveness is hard, but so is being forgiven. In fact, sometimes it's easier for us to forgive someone than it is to allow ourselves to be forgiven by someone else. One thing we can agree on, whether you are forgiving or being forgiven, the goal is always the same, and that is healing, reconciliation, reunion, restoration, and tearing down the walls that would separate us. So, In chapters 32 and 33, again, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the story. The twins, Jacob and Esau, were very different from one another. Esau was a man's man. He loved the outdoors activities and tending the sheep and hunting. And Jacob preferred to stay at home and learn from his mother. And one day Esau came in from the field famished, and he begged Jacob to give him something to eat. And in return, Jacob sold a bowl of soup or lentils to his older brother in exchange for his birthright. And Esau traded the larger portion of their inheritance for a bowl of beans. And we can find this in Genesis chapter 25, 29 through 34, for those of you who are taking notes. So how do you heal the painful hurts of the past? And we see this in Genesis chapters 32 and 33. It provides an answer to that question. It is the story of Jacob's reunion with his estranged brother Esau. And through hard experience, Jacob discovered that reconciliation is possible, but it is very difficult and it can be very costly. So I just spoke about how Esau came in and begged Jacob for the bowl of pottage, and he traded his portion of inheritance for a bowl of soup. And then the deception continued. When their father Isaac knew that he was near death, he requested that his manly son Esau go and kill a deer to prepare a fine meal before dividing the estate. In other words, before giving him his blessing. He was going to give the blessing to Esau. But Rebekah, the mother of the twins, heard the request and helped Jacob pull off a grand scheme to fool Isaac into giving Jacob the inheritance. And so, again, if you have a chance to read the story, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. In the end, Jacob had to run for his life. He fled to another country to find his mother's relatives who would care for him. And it was many years before he returned to his own family. When he did, he heard that his brother Esau was looking for him. The deceiver Jacob was scared, so he devised a plan so that his brother could only destroy half of Jacob's wealth if he was caught. And we can see that in Genesis 32. So 20 years had passed since Jacob last saw Esau. And during those long years where he was in Haran, you have to wonder what Jacob thought about. So for 20 years, he had to think about how he had deceived his brother and how his brother might have felt towards him. So here he is in Haran, and, did he remember that he tricked his brother out of the birthright? Was he ashamed that he dressed up like his brother Esau to receive the blessing? Did he feel remorse for lying to his father? Did he have regret for kissing his father Isaac and pretending to be Esau? But now only one question lingers in his mind. How will his brother Esau respond? Jacob had sent messengers to Esau hoping to win his favor, and the messengers came back with the word that Esau is traveling to meet him, but he's accompanied by 400 men. So Jacob panics. That's not what he's expecting. So here he is in his mind thinking, here's his brother coming to get him back with his army. So Jacob panics, and with good reason. In his mind, it can only mean one thing, that Esau is coming back to get even with him after all these years. So Jacob takes some precautionary steps, and he divides his people into two groups. And we can see this in Genesis chapter 32, verses 7 and 8. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels into two bands, and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. His reasoning was understandable. If Esau came and attacked one group, the other group could escape. And that made good sense. But it shows you how desperate the situation was from Jacob's point of view. He was willing to sacrifice one half of his family in order to save the other half. And it is amazing how things go through your mind that you're expecting one thing and what's really happening is totally different. So sometimes we worry about things that are not real. They appear real in our own minds, but sometimes they're not real. So in Genesis chapter 32, verses 9 through 12, Jacob prays to God for deliverance. And we're going to read those scriptures. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saith unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So this is the first recorded prayer for Jacob. And it was a good prayer because first he recalls the promise of God made to Isaac and Abraham, and that's in verse 9. This is a promise he made to Isaac and Abraham. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. And second, he confesses his unworthiness in verse 10. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. And in verse 11, he states his fear for the mother and the children that will be attacked. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. And in verse 12, he also reminds God again of that he promised to bless him. And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. Though it is only 4 verses long, this prayer contains all the elements of a true biblical prayer. Jacob says all the right things. It breathes a spirit of honest humility and deep trust in God. Best of all, the prayer is short and to the point, which is exactly how you should pray if you thought your family was being threatened. So then he offers gifts to Esau to turn away his anger. And we can see this in verses 13 through 21. And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, Pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. And he commanded the foremost, saying, When Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, Whose art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then shalt thou say, They be thy servant Jacob. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. And so commanded he the second, and the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, On this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when you find him. And say ye moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, peradventure he will accept of me. So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. So clearly Jacob is sending several messages by offering such a large gift of animals that he was prosperous and that he truly wanted fellowship with his brother Esau, that he recognizes the enormity of the sin that he had sinned against his brother, and that he recognizes Esau's greatness by offering him a great gift. All these elements are at play. Jacob not only picked out a gift for Esau, he also gave specific instructions to the men who would lead the herd to Esau. When Esau asked what this is all about, they ought to say that they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. Jacob's motives were transparent. He hoped to overwhelm his brother with the gifts that would turn away his anger. In fact, chapter 32, verse 20 states that fact. And you say, Moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, peradventure he will accept of me. We're going to go over to Proverbs chapter 18, verse 16. It says, A man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him before great men. That's just something that I wanted to speak in reference to the gift that Jacob gave to his brother. But there could be a problem here because Jacob is still thinking on a purely human level of revenge and appeasement. He's trying to buy his forgiveness from his brother with an extravagant gift. He thinks he can atone for his sins by offering some goats, camels, and bulls. But it doesn't work that way. God doesn't want the blood of animals. He wants his people to come to him with broken and contrite hearts. And the same is true for Esau. The last thing he needs is a few more hundred animals to take care of. Even if he accepts the animals, that will not atone for what Jacob did. But Jacob hasn't figured that out yet. He's given his brother all the presents and thinking that that's going to appease his brother's anger. And then Jacob finds himself he spends the night at the Jabbok River. And some of the words that may describe his emotional state, and this is the night before he meets his brother. He was fearful, he was anxious, guilt-ridden, he was unsure of himself, he was worried, and he was alarmed. Again, he's not sure yet how his brother's going to accept him. Again, his brother's there with 400 men. He could slay him if he chose to. So I could see where he would be fearful and anxious. And as he's by the river, let me see if we can go there. Let's go up to chapter 32, verse 22. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. Verse 23. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, for a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So as I said, he wrestles with this man, and the next morning, Jacob has 3 new things. He has a new name. He's now called Israel. He has a new limp because the angel touched the hollow of his thigh. And now he has a new confidence in God. In those few hours by the Jabbok River, his stubborn self-confidence was finally broken, and by sunrise, Jacob had learned 2 valuable lessons. When you walk with God, you have no need to fear. And when you walk with God, you have no need to play games. Once he was totally yielded to God, his fear had vanished, and he was ready to meet his brother Esau. He wasn't sure how Esau would respond, but after wrestling with the angel of the Lord, it didn't really matter anymore. There was not certainty on how the outcome was going to turn out, but he had confidence. And what a tremendous truth that is. God's answer to fear is not certainty, but confidence. The absence of fear does not equal the certainty of deliverance. And you might remember the words of the 3 Hebrew children when they were thrown in the fiery furnace in Daniel chapter 3. They said, Our God is able to deliver us from these flames, but if not, we will worship him anyway. That's true biblical confidence. Maybe you will be delivered, and maybe you won't. But if you know God, it doesn't matter. He can deliver you from the fiery furnace, or he can deliver you in the fiery furnace. Or he might not physically deliver you at all. But even then, God has promised to never leave you, no matter how bad your situation might be. So Jacob has no idea about what he faces when he finally sees Esau. But this time it doesn't matter. No more games, no more extravagant gifts, no more deals on the side. Just one brother going out to meet another brother. And what happens next, he leaves it in the hands of God. So Jacob meets Esau at last. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming down the road toward him, flanked by 400 men. The moment of truth has arrived. Whenever a problem arises, you always have 2 options. You can run from it, or you can face it head on. Jacob decides to face Esau man to man. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Do you remember what Jacob had called Esau when he sent the gift to him? He called him his Lord, and he called himself his servant. These are the words of a guilty man, and by bowing down, he was in effect admitting his guilt, and he was begging his brother for forgiveness. How would Esau respond? With just a word, he could have commanded his soldiers to kill Jacob on the spot. What will he do if he wants to get even? Because this is his big chance. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. What a moment that must have been. While Jacob was bowing and scraping, Esau is running to hug his brother. Just like that, the animosity of 20 years was swept away. Their mother, Rebekah, was right. She had told Jacob when he left Beersheba that Esau's anger would eventually pass away. Like a spent volcano after an eruption, Esau had cooled down after 20 years. He had settled down and made a life for himself, and on his own initiative, he had decided to forgive his brother Jacob. What an irony. During all those years that Jacob lived in mortal dread of seeing his brother, at the same time, God was working in Esau's heart, leading him to the place of forgiveness. While Jacob feared his brother, Esau couldn't wait to see him. Forgiveness is given and not earned. And in chapter 33, verses 5 through 7, it says, "And he lifted up his eyes and saw the woman and the children." Let me go back a verse. "And Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, and said, Who are these with thee? And he said, The children which God hath graciously given thy servant. And then the handmaids came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near Rachel, and they bowed themselves." And so that was Jacob presenting his family to Esau. So Esau asked why Jacob had sent the animals to him, and his answer is pure. He said, "To find favor in your eyes." But Esau said, "I've got all the animals I need," and he told his brother to keep them. But Jacob's reply is, "I have found favor in your eyes. Please accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all that I need." So it says that Esau accepted the gift only because Jacob, his brother, had insisted. So do you see the difference between Jacob and Esau? To some extent, Jacob is still trying to earn his forgiveness, so he sent the herds in order to find favor in the eyes of his brother Esau. But now he knows that you don't give a gift in order to earn forgiveness. Forgiveness is always a free gift. If it isn't free, it isn't forgiveness. So in this chapter, Esau actually looks better than Jacob because at every point, Esau seems to be more ready to forgive Jacob than Jacob is to be forgiven. Jacob looks and acts like a guilty man, while Jacob bows and scrapes. Esau is the one that runs out to meet him. While Jacob calls him my Lord, Esau throws his arms around his neck, and while Jacob forces the gift upon him, Esau then invites him to his home. By all rights, Esau ought to be angry, but he's not. And Jacob had a hard time dealing with that. See, he was expecting his brother to be mad at him. As you come to the end of the story, in verses 12 through 17, chapter 33, Esau begs Jacob to come home with him, to go home with him in Seir. And Jacob reluctantly agrees and promises to follow him there. But then when the time comes, Jacob doesn't follow him, and he goes west to Succoth, while Esau goes south to Seir. The final proof of Jacob's sincerity is the altar he builds when he gets to Succoth, and we can see this in chapters 33, verses 18 through 20. "And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padanaram, and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar, and called it El Elohe Israel. There he worshipped God, praising him for his goodness and bringing him home at last and restoring his relationship with his brother Esau." So there's 4 lessons that could be seen here on forgiveness. Sometimes it is more difficult to be forgiven than it is to forgive, as I said in the beginning of this. Accepting forgiveness requires a deep humility and enormous courage. As long as we live in fear, we can neither forgive nor be forgiven. Healing begins when we confess our sins and accept God's forgiveness. Is healing possible? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. Will it change the past? No. But what will forgiveness do? It'll set us free from the past so we can move on into the future. And what's the hardest part about being forgiven? Believing that forgiveness is possible. So that was just one example on forgiveness in the Bible. There are many more, and one of them would be Joseph and his brothers. And we know that Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and most of you know the story. There was a famine in the land, and Joseph was, after being in prison for some years, raised to be second in command to Pharaoh, and his brothers came, and like I say, you know the story. They came for food because there was a famine in the land. Joseph ultimately reunites with his brothers and forgives them. So another example of the healing power of forgiveness among brothers. Then we have another story of the prodigal son. And we know that story, how there was a man who had two sons, and the oldest was obedient and content to live with his father. The younger couldn't wait to get away from the family to live life on his own terms. And how many of us, when we were younger, just wanted to do that? We just wanted to get out of under the thumb of mom and dad, and we thought we knew everything, didn't we? Yeah. So the younger couldn't wait to get away from his family and live on his own terms, and when he was able, he went to his father to ask for his portion of his inheritance. And when he got his money, he ran off to a faraway land. And Jesus says that the young man wasted his money. He had no job, no friends, and he was willing to take on whatever job he could get, and he ended up taking care of the pigs for a farmer. He was so destitute that he was willing to eat the pig stock, the corn, maybe, whatever they feed the pigs. He was willing to eat that to stay alive. And the young man wised up and realized that he had a loving father at home who treated his servants better than the way he was currently living. And he decided to return home as a servant to his father. At least he would have food to eat. Little did he know that his father was expecting his return. And as soon as the father saw the young man on the horizon, he ran to meet him with open arms for forgiveness. Though the boy returned with hopes of just being a servant, the father accepted him as the son that he always was, and the boy was forgiven and restored to his former position in the family. And like I say, there are many examples, and I'll just speak on one more. We had a couple about brothers among brothers, one about fathers and sons. And this one is the woman taken in adultery. In a show of divinity, Jesus forgave a woman who was caught in the act of adultery. She was brought to the Lord by the spiritual leaders of town. They wanted to see if Jesus, claiming to be the Son of God, will obey the law of God and have this woman stoned. Instead, Jesus said that they were welcome to start stoning as soon as they felt like they were without sin and did not deserve a stoning of their own, basically. They dropped their rocks and walked away. Jesus feigned surprise when he looked up from writing in the dirt and saw that the woman was standing there alone with no accusers. Asking her if there was anyone left to accuse her of her sin, she answered no. And Jesus responded, "Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." You see, forgiveness is an attribute of God that we are consistently taught in the Bible and that we too can demonstrate to others. There's a little story I want to share with you. I don't know if any of you have heard it, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Perhaps you've heard the story of a young man who had sinned greatly, kind of like the prodigal son. He had moved far away from his home, and for many months the young man followed the path of sin wherever it had led him. No evil thing was kept from him. He committed every sin in the book and broke all 10 commandments. Never one time did he write home to his parents. They did not know whether he was dead or alive. And the day came when he realized what a fool he had been. Desiring to be forgiven, he wrote a letter to his father saying, "Dad, if you'll take me back, I'm ready to come home, but I'm afraid that you won't let me. I'll be on the next train Tuesday, and if you're willing to forgive me, when the train passes by the house, tie a piece of white cloth on the oak tree in the front yard. And when I see the white cloth, I'll know that you are willing to take me back. And if I don't see it, I'll stay on the train and keep going." So the father wrote back. He said, "Come home, son." He said, "I'll be waiting for you." But the son didn't believe him. And when Tuesday came, he boarded the train, filled with fear, wondering what his father would do. And as the train drew near, he said to the man sitting next to him, "I can't bear to look out the window. When we go by the white house that is around the next curve, tell me if you see a piece of white cloth in the oak tree." The son put his head down and he waited. When the train had went past the house, the son raised his head and said, "Mister, what did you see?" "Was there a piece of white cloth in the tree?" And the man said, "I didn't see a tree. It was completely covered with white cloth." The father couldn't wait to have his son back. Oftentimes, other people are more willing to forgive than we are to be forgiven. Many people live for years in broken relationships because they can't believe forgiveness is possible. The hardest thing you'll ever do is to go to someone and say that I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Nothing is more frightening because, like Jacob, we fear what others will say or do. We fear that if we go out on a limb, the people that we have hurt will not forgive us. And the wall that keeps us apart all too often is our unwillingness to be forgiven. Your greatest need is for God's forgiveness. Too many people are chained in the past, and the jailer's name is fear. But I have good news. Jesus has the key that opens the door to freedom. And that's if you're willing to be forgiven. If you are willing to forgive, Jesus can set you free. So I have a question. Are you willing to be forgiven? Until the answer is yes, you will stay chained to the past. But when you are willing both to forgive and to be forgiven, then the healing can begin. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, And be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. We'll also look at Ephesians 4. Oh, no, I just read that one, sorry. We'll also look at Matthew 6:12. Just as God has forgiven us, we dare not withhold forgiveness from others, not if we want God to forgive us. Consider the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, known as the Lord's Prayer. And in that prayer he said, "And forgive us our sins as we have forgiven those who have sinned against us." And that's in the NLT. Maybe today some of us have realized that we've been holding on to resentment and haven't yet started the forgiveness process. Maybe also we realize not only how much we've been hurt, but also how much we may have hurt others. If we want to be healed and whole, forgiveness is the only way. We need to give Jesus Christ control of our lives by releasing our anger and bitterness and forgive. Because unless we forgive others their sins against us, just as Jesus said, God will not forgive our sins against him. God's forgiveness, therefore, is the best incentive that we can have to forgive others. Forgiveness brings health and wholeness back into our lives, and forgiveness brings us back into a full and meaningful life. And finally, let's confess our sins before our holy and righteous God and receive his forgiveness, followed by his healing, peace, and joy. And one thing I want to share that God has been speaking to me for the past week. And it's kind of funny because it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's like that still small voice that you know who's talking to you. And it's nothing major. He told me that he doesn't do anything without a purpose. He doesn't just do things to do things. He always has a purpose. So, whatever you're going through, there's a purpose. Now, we might not like what we're going through, but sometimes we have to go through things to get to a certain place in God. So, that being said, if anyone here this morning feels in their heart that they have unforgiveness, this altar is the place to be. Get yourself right with God this morning before you leave this place and start the process of healing. Because God wants you to be healed of that unforgiveness. He wants you to walk in freedom. He doesn't want you to be bound by that. Bob, if you could play a little something in the back. I just thank you for those who have tuned in. God bless you, and we'll see you again on Wednesday.